We have a lot to cover in today's video as we get closer to the NHL trade deadline. Today we're looking at the latest on teams like the Toronto Maple Leafs, the Ottawa Senators, the Montreal Canadiens, plus could we see a big return in Boston? There is some rumors floating around about a potential Patrice Bergeron return and come out of retirement. We also have some updates as well involving former NHLer Cody Hodgson, news from the NHL waiver wire, and Tyler Ennis has retired. All that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a lot of news and rumors to take a look at today. I want to kick things off today with the announcement that Tyler Ennis, former NHL player, has officially announced his retirement. Tyler Ennis had a fairly successful NHL career, played with 5 different teams, including the Buffalo Sabres, which is where he played the longest. That's where he started his career. Had a couple different stints with the Ottawa Senators, Minnesota Wild, Toronto Maple Leafs, and the Edmonton Oilers. He finished up most recently playing over in Europe. Ennis was always a very popular teammate, battled his fair share of injuries over the years, but was always a fairly productive player when he was healthy. So obviously a good little career on his part. Lots to be proud of, and certainly wish him the best moving forward here and whatever comes next for him. We also got news today that a retired player and one of the greats, Jumbo Joe Thornton, will have his number 19 raised to the rafters in San Jose next season. The Sharks made an announcement today that Jumbo Joe will be having his jersey retired, and he'll do that next year. Obviously, well-deserved. I mean, Joe Thornton had a phenomenal career. Really, if you look at the all-time list for games played, points, assists, like he's right up there. Certainly one of the all-time greats for sure. Arguably the greatest passer of his era. That's probably fair to say, I think. And obviously, just a really well-liked teammate and a very accomplished hockey player. So the only thing that eluded Joe in his career was that elusive Stanley Cup, but lots of other individual accolades and team accolades as well during international play. So certainly Jumbo Joe had a phenomenal career. We'll be curious to see exactly when the Sharks do the jersey retirement. I wonder if they may wait and maybe do it when Toronto's visiting. Obviously, he played in Toronto for a little bit, mostly a San Jose Shark or the Boston Bruins as well. Obviously, that's where he started his career. I suspect a lot of times when these ceremonies take place, that's the visiting team is usually a team that's connected to the player. So we'll see once we have an official date that we can look forward to next year, but a well-deserved honor there for Jumbo Joe. One of the hockey games on the schedule for tonight, the Chicago Blackhawks and the Buffalo Sabres, has been postponed for another day, so they'll bump that game from tonight till tomorrow. There's still issues in the Buffalo area with travel because of the terrible weather that's been there the last few days. Obviously, I believe they had some travel bans. I'm not even sure what was all going on there. I just know that the weather was terrible and there was lots of people stranded that couldn't get in or out, and it makes sense that game would be postponed today. So there were supposed to be 3 games tonight. We will only have 2 instead. They will play tomorrow. News from the NHL waiver wire. We had Radim Zohorna of the Penguins on waivers yesterday. I believe I forgot to mention that in my video, but he was placed on waivers yesterday. Today we found out he cleared, so he's been reassigned to the minors, and the Penguins have now called up Ryan Shea instead. The Calgary Flames today placed forward Walker Duehr on waivers as well. To be honest, Duehr is still in his mid-20s, 25, 26 years old, has good size and speed. Not a ton of offense. He's had his moments playing in a more of a middle 6, third line role for Calgary, especially last year. He was more of a, I guess you could say, more of a late season revelation last year. One of the younger players who was given more opportunity later in the season once changes were made behind the bench. And, he had a good little run there. This year hasn't been quite as productive. He's played in 19 games this year, put out 4 points. So we'll see. Obviously, the Flames have had a variety of younger players getting opportunities this year and last year. So be curious to see if he's picked up. I wouldn't be completely shocked if he was. He could be a decent bottom 6 pickup, but a fairly cheap option for teams looking to add depth ahead of the deadline and ahead of the playoffs. Now, in the past couple of days, we talked about the fact that former NHLer Cody Hodgson, who's been out of the game for, 7 or 8 years, was looking to make a comeback. It was talked about on Saturday headlines by Elliot Friedman this past weekend, saying that there was word that Cody Hodgson at age 34 was looking to come back. He'd been out of the game since he was 26, 27 years old. He had some really complex medical issues going on, which unfortunately derailed his career. During his early part of his career, he was kind of viewed upon as being one of the, a player with really smart, great vision, just really seeing the ice well. And his career never really materialized to the point or extent that a lot of people thought that it could. It's really unfortunate, but we do get news today that he is going to get a shot. It's not in the NHL, but it is in the AHL. He's got a professional tryout agreement with the Milwaukee team in the American Hockey League, which is the affiliate team of the Nashville Predators. Of course, he did spend some time there before, so there's familiarity in the organization. So that's really great news to see. I'd be really curious to see how he makes out. He's been skating and training on his own, I believe, with some trainers and stuff for quite some time. Be real curious to see if this goes well. Could he maybe eventually get back to the NHL maybe next year? Hard to say. Be curious to see how that works out. Good on him for being brave enough to come back and give it a try after being away that long. I'm sure it's not going to be an easy road. Obviously challenging, I'm sure, from a training, conditioning standpoint, from a health standpoint, and just the mental capacity to not, to be able to overcome everything. I'm sure a lot of players, once they're away from the game for a year or two, if they can't make it back, making it back, they say the longer you're away, the harder it is. That's a long road to be away for. So certainly, like I said, a great inspirational story for him trying to come back and revitalize his career. So I hope it works out for him. Some other news around the league, including some injuries and updates. The St. Louis Blues today placed forward Kasperi Kapanen on injured reserve. They said he's going to be out for approximately 4 weeks. And they have recalled Adam Gaudette from the American Hockey League to take his spot on a roster. Gaudette, I believe, at the time of this is the leading goal scorer, if I'm not mistaken, in the AHL. So as much as Gaudette struggled to be consistent in the NHL and kind of, stick, so to speak, he has had great success at the American League. So we'll see if he can make a better go of it this time around. And in Ottawa, Josh Norris was not on the ice again today, but was conducting some off-ice workouts. Head coach Jacques Martin said he was optimistic that he would be able to return on one of their games over the weekend. So we'll see if that works out or not, because we're also real close to Shane Pinto returning, and we're going to talk about the Sens here a little bit further as well. A little later in the video, could see some big changes to the roster, some for the better and some subtractions depending on what moves they make here. So we'll get into that here shortly. In Chicago, Nikita Zaitsev is off to injured reserve as well due to a knee injury, so he's going to be out for some time. And in New Jersey, they're activating Timo Meier today to return in action tonight. Actually, as I record this video, that game should be just starting in the last little bit here, where the New Jersey Devils are battling the Montreal Canadiens. To make room on the roster, they demoted Shane Bowers, who had been recalled from the AHL. Now, as I mentioned, a variety of rumors around the league. The big one, the most intriguing rumor, not even a trade rumor, but we know that the Boston Bruins are a team that's having great success again this year. A lot of people, myself included, thought they would take a step back because of all the players they lost in the offseason. But I will say a lot of their players that they signed, they might not have looked like they were, players who could produce as much. When you take away Bergeron, Krejci, Hall, and you're adding guys like Geeky, JVR, you don't think that you're going to be as good. It's just that simple. But a lot of guys have stepped up and performed above expectations, and their, goaltending is a huge part of their success. Let's not kid ourselves. At the end of the day, would they want to add down the middle before the playoffs? I would suspect that if the Bruins want to add anywhere, that's probably what they would look to do. And obviously there's a number of trade options that they've been linked to in the centerman. We've heard potentially Elias Lindholm. We've heard Sean Monahan in Montreal. We've heard a few other options. But today we got word from, I guess, because I'm going to say joke around, call themselves the Rumor Boys on the Chicklets podcast. Ryan Whitney was saying that there's some people that think Patrice Bergeron might be contemplating coming out of retirement and maybe returning. If he signs, for just to put it out there in case you don't know the rules, as long as he signed it on a roster by the trade deadline, if he did that, he could play and he could be eligible for playoffs. So it's certainly possible from that standpoint. Now, is it reasonable? Is it likely? That very well could be a different story. It's really difficult to say how much there is to this rumor. If you think about it, though, if they could sign Bergeron to a cheap 1-year deal for the rest of the season, that would probably be a lot more cost effective. And to be honest, he could probably still play at a high enough level that it would be a better option than just about anybody they could acquire anyway. Clearly, even last year, as his last NHL season, he was playing at a very high level. Went out on top for sure. Now, like I said, he's been skating a lot. That's been confirmed. He's been spotted and doing enough skating that part is certainly not a rumor. That's confirmed truth. But according to Whitney, he was saying that some people said that he's just keeping in shape to be able to play in the alumni games. He's like, well, that didn't make sense to him given the fact that he is so much younger than a large part of the alumni and he's in great shape. Like he wouldn't need to be doing that for that. So, is he contemplating more than that? It's first year away from the game. Is he missing it? Have the Bruins contacted him and said, hey, would you consider this? Who knows? It's an intriguing thing to think about. Does it make sense for Boston? It absolutely does. If you talk to Bergeron and he said, yeah, I'll come back for the rest of the year, why wouldn't you do that? I mean, when he last played, he was still one of the game's best two-way players. If he said, yeah, you know what, I don't like how last year ended. We had a historical regular season, and then we, went out first round, and, we screwed up the season. Like, it didn't go the way we wanted. I can't live with that. I want to have another crack at another cup. Wouldn't you, if you'd be crazy not to, right? He's made tons of money. I'm sure he'd sign cheap if he did. We'll have to see where this goes. At this point, it's really hard to substantiate the rumor a whole lot. I've seen other different media sources kind of chime in on this rumor today. Some thought it was interesting. Some thought it was far-fetched. It's hard to say, but it's, like I said, fun to think about. It's intriguing to think about. Makes a lot of sense from the Bruins' perspective. Does it make sense for the player? It kind of does if he wants to, and we really don't know. Until Patrice Bergeron denies the rumor, it's probably going to fester, and it's hard to say, but we'll be curious to see if anything does come from this. It would be a great way for them to get a center without having to give up any assets. Now, one of the teams that gets talked about a lot, of course, not only in Canada, but really throughout the NHL, North America, and the U.S. as well, is the Toronto Maple Leafs. Always a hot topic, especially in the Canadian, sports networks like Sportsnet and TSN. I know Elliotte Friedman on his latest podcast was talking a bit about the fact of how the Leafs, as much as they're a good team, you're starting to wonder if this team really should be buyers at the deadline. They've been consistently buyers at the deadline and adding, pretty high rate the past, really the last 5-6 years, but especially the last 2 to 3. Look what they did last year. It's some people thought maybe when it was all said and done and you could analyze things in retrospect that maybe they did too much. They added a lot at last year's deadline, and sometimes you mess too much with the team chemistry, things just don't work. Not to say that the players that come in underperformed or anything like that. Some of them did well, like O'Reilly was a pretty good fit there, but at the end of the day, it didn't work in a sense that they didn't have the success they were hoping to. Did they finally win a round? Yes, they did. So they did make some progress. But then the second round went horribly wrong. And at the end of the day, you could say it was mildly successful, but not nearly to the level that they wanted. We heard Sheldon Keefe today with a quote saying that after 42 games, I still have questions on who I can rely on. Like, that's multiple times he's called out his top players publicly. So, I see a lot of fans on social media screaming for Keefe to be fired. Honestly, maybe, I don't know. I'm not convinced that needs to be done just yet. I think a lot of it's on the players. If you look at their top players, like for example, since William Nylander signed that mammoth contract, and I have been a William Nylander supporter for a long time, he absolutely earned that contract. But I will say this, since he signed it, he has not played well. His play went right down the tubes after he signed the contract. So when you see things like that, it really questions motives. I have for the last couple of years said that in my honest opinion, and I'm not being a Leaf hater, just being real, my real opinion. I've said things like this about other teams too. I just don't know that the top players on the Leafs, and I'm including Matthews, Marner, Nylander, that they're that driven for a Stanley Cup. They don't seem like they want to really play to the level of making sacrifices in the playoffs and playing the playoff style that you need to play to be successful. They seem to be motivated strictly by money. And it's not a good recipe for winning a cup that way. Anyways, but what Friedman was saying is just that he just doesn't know that this is the team to be really adding to this year. For a team who made big step last year and getting over the hump, finally winning a round after all those years, and now this year it's like, do you even want to add? That's a step back. I mean, yes, they're in a playoff spot. They're a good team. I would be quite surprised if they somehow didn't make the playoffs, but there's still a lot of hockey left. There's still a half a season. And to be honest, they're not that far from falling out. There's enough teams like Tampa and Detroit right on their heels, even teams in the other division, if they happen to get into like a battle for a wild card spot. It's not unreasonable to think that if they have a couple of skids, that it could cost them. It's just that real, not simple. So as much as the Leafs have been linked to a lot of players, I guess today's speculation about the Leafs is that will they even do anything? Is Brad Treliving confident that this group deserves to be spending assets to try to give them a boost to perform better in the playoffs? Are they at risk of a head coaching change? There's lots of questions in Toronto, but they're not the questions that we were asking ourselves before about what they were going to add at the deadline. Because they just have, as we speak now, they're in a 4-game skid where they've blown leads in all those games as well. Hopefully Joseph Wall will be back in the next week or two. He seems to be getting closer. So, between he and Jones, and then they get Samsonov, who did have a better game. Goaltending could get interesting. Because of the cap, they may have to put one of the goalie on waivers. You don't know. That's going to get interesting too. It's just going to get complicated. So we'll have to see where this goes. But the Leafs are going to be an interesting team, and the whole feeling has changed right now on where they might be heading going towards the deadline. Now in Montreal, there's a lot of talk about Sean Monahan. I've seen updates today that you can add another team to the Monahan sweepstakes, and that's the New York Rangers. Now, we had confirmation from Darren Dreger of TSN about a week ago saying that when Monahan was signed to his current contract, a 1-year deal extension that he signed with Ken Hughes, that there was an understanding made that they're going to give him every opportunity to succeed this year, and then they'll move him ahead of the deadline to hopefully a spot where he can go and contend for playoffs. That was kind of in the agreement. The plan was probably to do that last year, except injuries got in the way. Now, for any reason that happens again this year, maybe things change. But Monahan's a player who, since he's been in Montreal, has been able to rejuvenate his career. Plays pretty decent on both sides of the puck. He can still produce offensively. And he's up there. Like, the Leafs are one of the teams that were linked to him. Because, get a look at the Leafs looking to probably want to add a top 9 player. And Monahan has been linked there. I've seen Monahan linked to the Bruins. We've heard talk about potential Habs Bruins trade. Frank Cervelli talked about that today. And, of course, the Rangers were another team that I had talking about. I believe it was fourthperiod.com, adding the Rangers to the list of teams that they believed were interested. Colorado and Winnipeg and Vancouver were already teams out there as well. Makes sense for the Canucks, too, if you think about it, with the Lotto line playing together with Pettersson, Besser, and Miller. Miller and Pettersson are normally both centers, and right now they're not. Rick Tocchet doesn't want to break that lineup because they've been just mowing through the NHL and demolishing and scoring at such a high rate here. If they leave that line together and they want to have that available for playoffs, maybe they add another center who can play in behind Pettersson in kind of a 2-3 spot. And while Monahan might be great for that, he's fairly responsible, can still produce, cheaper contract, still decent age. Maybe he's a fit there. It would make sense. Like, there's been some talk that Vancouver might want to add, depth on the wing, but with Miller playing with Pettersson now, you're not having both him and Miller or both those guys at center. Maybe that's where you add instead. They probably want to add some depth on defense too, but that's another story right now. Now, we'll see what happens with Monahan, but lots of teams in the mix there and a couple new ones added today. And in Ottawa, I want to finish with them. Bruce Garriock made mention in last night's game against the Avalanche, talking about the direction of the team during the intermission. Of course, Garriock works with TSN and Sun Media. Says that he expects the Sens to probably move Dominic Kubalik in the not-too-distant future, sometime ahead of the deadline. He believes as well they will talk to Vladimir Tarasenko, who was given a no-move clause for his 1-year deal. Although I've seen other sources, when it comes to Tarasenko, say that there's belief that Tarasenko might not waive and that he may want to talk to them about extending. That as much as a lot of people thought when he signed in Ottawa it would be strictly a 1-year deal, essentially he kind of ended up in a situation in kind of a no man's land in free agency this past offseason. Reportedly had a longer term deal originally. Then he was going to Carolina. Then something happened there and the deal got taken off the table. I don't know what happened with the Tarasenko Carolina conversations, but he ended up doing a 1-year deal with the Sens. Most people said that there was a lot of reports saying that he didn't really want to come to Canada, that it was just at that point it was the most money he could get on a 1-year deal, so he'd be willing to give it a try. Well, I've seen reports that he really likes it, that he's like him and his family really like the city. His kids are young, so they're enrolled in local youth hockey, and they're happy with the family lifestyle and all that, and that he actually would be open to staying. Now, doesn't mean that the Senators absolutely want to keep him. I think they've had their moments when he's been a pretty good player, production wise. He's been fine. He's actually producing at a pretty good rate, given his contract, his age, everything. He's not it's not a bad contract. He's living up to what he's supposed to do. I think we can say that. Now, could Vladimir Tarasenko sometimes be better defensively? Yeah, and I think every once in a while that kind of drives the coaches a little bit crazy, but you could probably say that about a lot of the Sens forwards. That's one of their bigger issues right now. So I'm not 100% convinced that Tarasenko goes, but I do understand why management might talk to him to see if he wants to, and if they can get a good return, maybe they consider it. I mean, at his age, how long is he a fit there? Hard to say, right? And there's a lot of talk right now about Jacob Chychrun. I've talked about it before. As of last week, the reports were from Elliotte Friedman saying that he didn't think the Senators really have any interest to trade him, but teams are calling. Gary Ock on the intermission last night was saying that teams are inquiring because they have 3 left defensemen that are all, making a good amount of money, whether Chabot, Sanderson, and Chychrun. And Chychrun's got the shortest term in his contract, and they wonder if he'll want to re-up there. Because to sign Chychrun to an 8-year deal and give him a raise, you would think realistically that should mean that Thomas Chabot's traded. To be completely fair, none of those guys are third-pair defensemen. They're all top 4. And you don't need 3 of your top 4 really being left shot, although they've experimented a lot with one of them, primarily Chychrun, playing on his offside. Hasn't been the greatest, but it hasn't had I'm not completely sure that that's the reason why. It's really a lot of other stuff going on. And there's other reports from somebody who's well connected to the team saying that there is some belief that because Chychrun, it's kind of like a second home for him. He has a lot of family, including his grandfather in Ottawa. Obviously his dad lives and works for the Panthers, but originally there's a lot of connections there to Ottawa. So it's basically a homecoming for him. And he was kind of desperate to get out of Arizona. It was crying happy tears. There's pictures of him as a kid wearing a Sens jersey. It's something that he was really thrilled with. But now there's some belief that hometown appeal might be wearing off a little bit, and that when it comes to re-signing there, maybe it's not that he won't or that he's absolutely not interested. It's just that he's not as interested as he was when he first got there. And I suspect that's probably because the team hasn't succeeded. When teams don't succeed and they lose, unfortunately, it creates an environment that's stressful, it's tense, people aren't having as much fun, and there could be doubts about people's futures. That's just the way the business of sports goes. So it's understandable. And really, to be completely honest, I would say that it's something that if things turned around and they went on a big winning streak and the future looked a lot brighter all of a sudden in, say, a month or 2 down the road, things could change. But at the same time, it means that the team is definitely fielding phone calls because he's a very interesting defenseman around the league. And apparently there's also talk that Steve Staios, when he worked with the Oilers were one of the teams that were actively interested in this player. And apparently Staios, there's rumors that he recommended to the Oilers that they not make the trade for him, that probably because the asking price was too high at the time. But they're also saying now that the Chychrun asking price to be moved out of Ottawa, if he would be, is really high. Gary Ock said that. So that tells you that they're really not overly anxious to do it unless they get a knock your socks off kind of offer. So we'll have to see. Obviously, something has to give. I personally don't know that anything happens with him ahead of the deadline. Could it? Sure, but it's not a given. They may want to talk to him about what an extension looks like this summer and see where that goes before they make a decision. There's also Shane Pinto eligible to return on the 21st, which he's expected to play against the Philadelphia Flyers. That is only, Sunday. That's not far away. So we need a contract for Pinto to likely come here in the next few days. There's also word that there's a 1, 2, and 4, 5, 6-year deals on the table right now for his consideration. The belief is it's still more likely than not that he's going to take the 1-year deal because it's going to be closer to his qualifying offer. So he can kind of bet on himself, have a strong finish to the year, and then renegotiate in the summer. Obviously, it's smart from the team's perspective to try to get him on a longer-term deal now because his value is not as high, right? He just went through a 41-game suspension and had a tarnishment on his reputation. With limited experience on his profile and on his resume here, and with what just happened, the offer on a longer-term deal is not going to be as good as it could be if he had played all year and was taking a step forward with where they thought he might be, right? So it makes sense for him to bet on himself. Makes sense for the team to try to push him to sign longer so that they might be able to get a discount. We'll see where it goes. Either way, expect a contract in place, well, probably sometime in the next couple of days because it has to be in order for him to play this weekend. So we'll see where that goes with the Anton Forsberg LTIR placement. They should be able to get that contract done without making another move. But after that, before they can activate anybody off LTIR, down the road, a move will have to come unless there's another injury or something else happens that transpires between now and then. So that is all your latest news updates for tonight. Let me know your thoughts on everything discussed down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, of course, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.